Is VR esports going to take over esports as we know it today? Is it possible for you to become a professional esports player in VR games? Is it even worth getting involved with it now? And if you do want to compete in VR esports, how exactly should you approach it so that you can maximize your chance of becoming a pro player? Well, to start answering these questions, it's important to look at where VR esports is right now and if it's really worthwhile to start paying attention to. Now, think about the grandest sci-fi versions of virtual reality, from Tron in The Matrix to Ready Player One. In these movies, characters are quite literally transported into digital worlds where they can live incredible lives, have experiences beyond our imagination, and participate in games and quests far more thrilling than anything we can experience in our day-to-day existence. Then, in 2012, when the Oculus was first announced, these kind of sci-fi stories started to become a bit more real. Suddenly, the mass public started to become aware that it wasn't as far-fetched as we once thought. And today, we continue to dream about a near future where we can enter astonishing inner worlds and play a part of stories and quests and games as interesting as movies. But how could all of this end up changing the esports landscape? It's obvious that esports is accelerating in popularity, with games like Valorant and League of Legends picking up more and more steam each year. But eventually, this will collide with virtual reality. No longer will you be playing the game through a window on your desk. Instead, you'll actually be inside the game and completely immersed in it. But right now, 10 years after the Oculus was announced, we find ourselves still in very early stages of VR and very, very early stages of VR esports. Sure, the technology has improved dramatically. In fact, my first experience in VR wasn't the greatest. I had strapped on the PlayStation VR headset, spent about 60 minutes in Skyrim, and stepped outside of it feeling kind of amazed and in awe, but also quite nauseous. Of course, just a handful of years later, today, the technology has gotten a lot cheaper and a lot better. But that doesn't mean that it's ready for the mainstream yet. It's still unlikely that VR will become even as common as consoles are in the coming years. But why is that? What are the problems that are holding virtual reality and virtual reality esports back? Well, to answer this, consider the following questions. Why are mobile games leading the entire gaming industry in terms of revenue? And what was it that got you to buy your first console or gaming PC? The answers are accessibility and game availability. Of course, if you already have a phone, then it's quite easy to download apps and play them right there. And if you want to step up and buy a console or gaming PC, then it's likely because you got hooked by a very specific game that caught your attention. Whether you got your first console for Halo or God of War, or you got your first gaming PC for Fortnite or Valorant. Now, unfortunately, these highlight the biggest problems in VR esports. There just aren't that many people who can afford to get into VR, and because of that, there are a lot of developers that are just unwilling to invest the time and energy into making VR games, which then means that there's less people who are willing to buy more VR headsets. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. And as a result, VR esports is still a very niche scene, despite the improving technology. But fortunately, there's a silver lining here. The first hurdles of VR have already been overcome. The technology and its potential are now way too obvious to ignore. And so companies like Google, Meta, and even Apple are now pouring billions of dollars into the development of VR and AR technology. And as this happens, we'll see an increasingly sophisticated level of hardware and software at cheaper and cheaper price points. We've already seen an influx in VR users with the $400 Quest and Quest 2, but consider how much more that will increase when these standalone headsets are twice the quality, or when the new generations of wireless PC headsets are as affordable as those Oculus Quests. As this happens, more and more developers and investors will pile into the space. And so if you desire to be a pro VR gamer, then you're gonna need to be ready for when that wave comes. And it's coming quite quickly. Because if your skills are trained up and you're prepared for the first real great VR games, then getting to that pro stage will come quite easily when competing with all the new and inexperienced competitors. So this leads us to a pretty big question. Should you get involved in VR esports right now, or is it too soon? Well, like I said, the VR esports scene is still quite far from being as mainstream as current day esports games, but the earlier you get involved, the greater your advantage will be. And of course, if there's less competition even right now, it means a greater chance of success within the tournaments and leagues that exist today. For example, consider how many people are actively playing CSGO today. Checking the data, we can see a peak of nearly 1 million players in the past 24 hours. Now, let's say that that's your competition, a million other players to get ahead of if you want to be the best. But then consider the game stats for VR esports games like Veil, just over 100 players at the 24-hour peak. Or consider a more popular VR game like Beat Saber, just over 1,000 peak players. Now consider how much easier it's going to be the best out of 100 or the best out of 1,000 when compared to being the best out of a million competing players. And this is where the untapped potential of VR esports comes into place. With VR tournaments and leagues like Veil Pro League offering up to $35,000 in prize money and such a low number of competing players, you might have an incredible opportunity to achieve your esports goals of turning skill and passion into tournament success and cash prizes. So then comes the question, how are you going to train to become a tier 1 professional VR esports player? Well, if that's your goal, then the first step is to identify the games that offer the greatest opportunities. As of today, many of the top VR esports games are shooting games, so it's ideal to build up your FPS skills. If you want to compete in these tournaments with prize money, then I'd recommend choosing a game like Pavlov, Veil, or Blaston as a primary game. But consider the others as your secondary ones as well, ideally competing in as many as you can. Of course, the mechanics will differ from game to game, but a lot of the muscle memory developed for aiming as well as the other skills will transfer between them, allowing you to become a great competitive player in at least a few games. But what skills should you be training, and how should you be training them? Well, first consider what skills you train in a typical FPS game. Then also think about how VR games will differ. For example, in a game like Counter-Strike, you will train your hands and fingers for your aiming skills. In VR, you'll want pretty similar aim training practice, but you'll be focused a lot on larger muscle groups in your arms and shoulders. And you'll also need to train different skills altogether, such as transitioning from running and reloading. Unlike traditional FPS games, you won't have a crosshair on the center of your screen at all times. You'll need to move or reload with your gun away from the center of your screen, and thus you'll need to practice your speed and accuracy of pulling up your gun and shooting. And of course, seemingly basic skills like throwing grenades, crouching, and corner peeking will all require completely new muscle memory, which will require tons of isolated practice in order to master. But much of what we discuss on this channel and what you've learned from skill development in other games will still apply here. The vast majority of players in any game, especially in VR, will solely rely on playing the game over and over again and hoping that they quickly improve. But a more practical, planned, and purposeful approach will help you to improve your skills a lot faster and give you a massive advantage. The first step is to just identify all of the skills in your game that you have to master. Break it down into core fundamentals like communication skills, peeking, movement, recoil control, target switching, macro strategy, and so on. The next step will be to identify the ways to effectively practice each of these. For example, using VR aim trainers, using modded maps, doing metronome training, or playing in scrim environments with your team. Taking the simple steps to set training goals and to identify ways to effectively practice each skill might sound quite simple on the surface, but again, the vast majority of players are going to be too lazy to do it, meaning it's an easy way for you to gain an incredible advantage. Now, a few bonus training aspects to keep in mind are going to be speed, fatigue, and transfer. In many of these VR games, movement speed is a pretty big deal, so consider practicing aiming drills that force you to move your arms at faster and faster speeds in order to improve your fast twitch muscles and reaction speed. Similarly, if you want to take a break from your primary game, consider secondary games like Beat Saber that force you to improve your arm speed and agility. But then consider the aspect of fatigue. Near the end of your gaming sessions, you'll be less accurate due to fatigue. This is something that you'll need to get used to, especially for larger tournaments where you have to play for long periods of time. So if you have an aim training session, I'd recommend doing at least part of it at the end of your gaming session when you're most tired. Learning to be accurate while fatigued will give you a significant advantage over most other players. And finally, consider non-VR games that can help you in your VR games. Counter-Strike, Valorant, and other team FPS games can give you a good level of strategic thinking in their VR counterparts. And of course, this applies for battle royales and similar genres. Now, earlier in this video, I described my simultaneously exciting and disappointing first virtual reality experience, but I didn't describe my second one. A few years ago, I gave VR a second chance when I borrowed an Oculus from a friend. At that time, I had become quite jaded by my lonely pandemic life, staying indoors day and night with little connection to friends or family. But the escape into VR felt real and exciting. I joined an amazing community in VR chat. I got mildly addicted to rhythm games, and I found myself improving my VR skills as if I was learning to play an instrument or learning to play a new esports game. But even then, I still didn't see the connection to VR esports. I didn't think it was really that close. But in researching this video, I went from a non-believer to an excited enthusiast and fan. I saw videos of incredible players like FN Hate It doing amazing things in the game Veil. I saw pro teams on stage at the VR League finals, and I watched Population 1 team Vortex use teamwork and synergy to earn a well-deserved victory. And seeing all of this, I realized that even though it's early days, VR esports is already here. And anyone who's tried VR recently will understand how well it can take you out of this world and into a new one. That sense of immersion is powerful. And when you pair up that immersion mixed with esports, it might just become the best kind of combination. Now, of course, virtual reality esports won't break into the mainstream or cannibalize the rest of esports anytime soon. But it doesn't mean that it's something you should ignore. In fact, now is an amazing time to get involved. Developing the physical skills and muscle memory now can put you in the right position to catch the wave when it comes. Plus, as big companies and sponsors start to pay more attention and get involved in the VR hype, it will mean increasing prize pools with relatively small competition, especially compared to traditional esports games. So whether you're already playing competitive VR games or you're really just considering it, then I encourage you to still give it a shot and to do it well. Simply pick your games, create training plans, and build a squad that you can play with, and then get involved in the VR esports scenes that currently exist. As a result, you'll end up being one of the first in this exciting new scene, one of the first real VR esports players, and a true pioneer to both virtual reality and esports. So if you're looking to get into VR esports, then I got some pretty exciting news for you from today's sponsor, which is Resolution Games. Now, in doing research for this video, I realized just how much passion and effort is required to create VR games, especially ones that can be played competitively. To get the right look, to get the right feel, to develop completely new gaming concepts that wouldn't work for traditional games, and to make VR games fun for players who are new, but also for seasoned veterans. And Resolution Games is doing all of this extremely well. They're kind of like pioneers of the VR esports industry with games like Blast On and their brand new game Ultimex. With Blast On, they've created one of the first real VR esports games, and they're actually putting money into the competitive scene. Right now, they even have the 2022 Blast On Championship with a $10,000 prize pool. And And all you have to do to get into it is just play the ranked mode or play in their weekly challenges and tournaments to earn championship points. Then the players with the most points or who win the last chance qualifiers make it to the championship, where they can play for big prize money. And this kind of esports support makes Blast On one of the best games that you can start training for if you have a VR headset. Of course, Blast On requires a complex process of laying down your own attacks while physically dodging your enemies. You'll have to train up your dodging agility while also multitasking and thinking ahead to plan your attacks. It's the kind of game that will push you both physically and mentally. So if you want to start mastering your mechanical skills in this game, then download it using the link in the description. But Resolution Games did not just stop with Blast On. Their new game, Ultimex, is kind of like a Rocket League style 2v2 esport, which requires fast thinking and finely tuned mechanics in order to win. It's the kind of game that you can enjoy if you're a new player, but also has a really high skill ceiling, which requires precision and timing to master. But after enough time learning to predict and time your shots, you'll no doubt be ready for the esports scene that will emerge for this game. Now, it appears that a lot of the skill required for this game are fine motor skills used to control your rocket arms, but it also requires the right positioning, which is a major factor for you to practice and be able to predict the flow of the game so you can get yourself into the right positions to score. Now, since it's a brand new game, the earlier you start grinding, the greater your skills will be when the first tournaments begin. So I highly recommend using the link in the description to add it to your wish list or download it. It should be dropping around the time that I post this video, so if it's available, go download it. If not, add it to your wish list and wait a day or so. And it's also key to note that it's not just coming out for the Quest, but also Steam VR and Pico headsets, and it's completely free. So regardless of the headset that you have or that you plan to get, you can grab Ultimex and start training. Again, I want to emphasize the opportunities possible by taking advantage of these kind of games. Since the VR esports scene is just emerging, the faster you start mastering these games, the greater the advantage you'll have. And right now, you have the opportunity to play for prize pools of thousands of dollars with far, far less competition than any traditional esport. So if you want to learn more about either of these games or try them out for yourself, use the links in the description. Doing so will end up helping the channel, but it might also put you on your brand new esports path. So let me know which VR esports you are most invested in or excited about. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about the VR esports scene in general. And again, a final shout out to the hardworking devs at Resolution Games. I love what you guys are doing, so just keep paving the way for future VR esports. And hope all you guys love the video. Keep on grinding, keep on improving, and I'll see you all in the next video.